That Tuesday morning, I was surrounded by 12 executives when my CEO looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you think you're that valuable, walk out." He expected me to shrink, to apologize, to stay small. Instead, I stood up, closed my laptop, and walked out with the one thing he never saw coming: the patent that built his entire company. What happened next cost him everything. Stay with me because this isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your worth. Subscribe and tell me, what would you have done? I used to believe Solara Dynamics was the kind of company that built legacies. I joined at 27, fresh out of Stanford, full of conviction that science and integrity could live in the same building. For years, it felt true. The labs were alive with ideas. The engineers worked side by side, and I poured everything I had into one project: the Eclipse Core, a zero-loss quantum battery module I believed could change the world. It was elegant, powerful, and completely mine. But time corrodes even the purest metals. When Ethan Rourke became CEO, everything shifted. He was charming at first, the kind of man who smiled too easily, who turned every meeting into a performance. He came from private equity, not engineering, and he treated Solara less like a company and more like a portfolio trophy. The new investors wanted numbers, not discovery. Innovation means nothing if it doesn't scale, he told us one morning during an all-hands meeting. I remember the tone. It wasn't inspiration. It was a warning. Suddenly, every project had to justify its existence in revenue charts and cost curves. The labs became quieter, our proposals shorter, our meetings more political. I stopped hearing laughter in the hallways. What used to be about vision became about valuation. Ethan began surrounding himself with people who didn't challenge him, the kind of executives who nodded at everything, who'd rather stay safe than be right. I stayed focused on my work, but the walls were closing in. When my patent proposal for the Eclipse Core went into review, the process felt wrong. The legal team asked me to pre-sign an assignment draft, something no one had requested before. It would transfer ownership to Solara immediately, even before official filing. I questioned it, and Naomi Greer, the chief legal officer, smiled the way someone does when they think you'll fold soon. "It's just procedure," she said. But I'd written those procedures, and I knew she was lying. From that moment, something in me went quiet. The woman who once believed in collaboration began documenting everything: emails, test results, timestamps, design revisions, all tied to my personal blockchain registry. I didn't know exactly what was coming, but I could feel the betrayal forming like static in the air. Ethan had started calling the Eclipse Core our innovation, not mine, ours. That was when I realized ours really meant his. And I began preparing for the day I'd have to prove what was mine. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those sterile, too bright days where the air conditioning hums louder than people breathe. The 38th floor conference room was a monument to money: white marble table, glass walls, a skyline view that made everyone feel smaller. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his posture sharp, his voice rehearsed. 12 executives surrounded him, all in dark suits, all silent. The screen behind him displayed the words, "Eclipse Initiative, the future of energy independence." For a moment, I felt proud. My work, my equations, my sleepless nights, it was finally being unveiled. Then the next slide appeared. My stomach went cold. The diagram was mine, but the title beneath it wasn't. It read, "Property of Solara Dynamics, patent filed." My name appeared below as contributor, not inventor, contributor. I blinked hard, thinking I misread it, but the text didn't change. I'd written those blueprints by hand, tested every sequence, authenticated every data line with my own encryption key. And now, in front of 12 people, my life's work had been stripped of my name. "Ethan," I said, keeping my tone professional, my voice even. "We need to pause on this slide. The architecture you're presenting matches an existing proprietary framework I developed before transfer. There are legal implications here." The air tightened. Ethan's eyes cut toward me, still smiling for the audience but colder underneath. "Julia," he said, voice sweet with condescension. "I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've had this reviewed by counsel. Everything's clean." I looked toward Naomi, seated 3 chairs away. She didn't meet my gaze. I knew then they'd moved forward without me. Respectfully, I continued, if Solara builds this platform on my pre-existing design, we'll be in violation of both IP disclosure and federal patent ethics. That's not just risk, it's liability. The room went dead silent. Ethan's grin twitched, then froze. He stepped closer, resting his hands on the table like a judge leaning in. You've always been the cautious one, haven't you? He said, almost gently. That's why I value you, but you need to understand something. Caution kills innovation. I need boldness. The subtext was clear. I was standing in his way. He turned to the room, pretending to explain for their benefit. Sometimes the people who invent things think they own them. But what they build here, what they build under this roof, belongs to Solara. He looked back at me. You understand that, don't you? I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for me to back down, to smile and say yes. Instead, I said, I understand perfectly. That was when he went in for the kill. If you think you're that valuable, he said, voice louder now, echoing off the glass, walk out, go ahead. See how far you get without Solara. The words hit like a slap. No one moved, no one even breathed. I saw a flicker of something in Naomi's expression, not guilt, but discomfort. She was afraid of being seen in the same light. Ethan leaned back, confident, already certain I'd fold. That's what bullies count on. Silence disguised as loyalty. I looked up at the projection again. My work, stolen in daylight. My name reduced to a footnote. And beneath the corporate logos, the faint watermark from my personal design suite, my hidden identifier, still visible in the corner. They'd stolen it, but they hadn't even seen the proof they left behind. My pulse slowed. I gathered my notes, closed my laptop with deliberate calm, and stood. Your statements are acknowledged, I said. His smirk wavered, confused by my composure. I pushed my chair back, the sound echoing like a gavel. I'll take your advice, Ethan. I'll walk out. No one spoke as I crossed the room. The only sound that followed me was the soft hiss of the glass door closing behind me, and his laughter, sharp and hollow, chasing me down the corridor like the sound of a fuse being lit. I didn't quit that day, not in spirit at least. I walked out of that conference room and into my office, shut the door and sat still for almost an hour. My mind wasn't panicking, it was calculating. Ethan thought humiliation would break me, but all he'd done was confirm what I already suspected. For months, I'd noticed discrepancies, versions of files that didn't match my logs, metadata shifted by seconds, subtle enough that no one but the creator would notice. That's when I started my quiet project, a personal mirror of everything tied to the Eclipse Core. Every schematic, every test simulation, every single note was backed up, time-stamped, and sealed with my own encryption signature. Blockchain authentication, private server, cold storage drive. Not one line existed without my digital fingerprint. They thought they could erase me from my own invention, but my identity was written into the DNA of the design itself. 2 weeks before the confrontation, I had found something that chilled me more than angered me. In the shared legal directory was a draft of the Eclipse Core patent, 2 versions. One listed inventor Julia Cross. The second, created 4 minutes later, listed inventor Solara Dynamics R&D division. Everything else was identical. They hadn't even bothered to change the timestamps. It was a sloppy fraud. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I copied both documents and stored them on a private offline drive. The evidence was too powerful to waste on emotion. They were creating a paper trail, counting on me to eventually sign the transfer form out of pressure or fatigue, but they didn't know that I'd already documented their actions step by step. Every email, every revision, every change in language. I built my own archive of deceit. The longer I stayed, the more they revealed without realizing it. Naomi started sending me subtle reminders, forms to sign, policy updates to acknowledge, little traps disguised as bureaucracy. I signed nothing. Instead, I let her believe I was too shaken to resist. The quieter I became, the more careless they grew. One night, while finishing a report, I saw a new directive in the company's intranet: internal IP audit and file consolidation. I knew exactly what that meant. They wanted me to delete the only evidence that proved my authorship. That's when I decided the next move wouldn't be a defense, it would be an extraction. I prepared my resignation letter, but it wasn't just a goodbye. It was a legal weapon disguised as formality. At the bottom, I included a single line: attached all original invention documentation as filed under the Federal Patent Integrity Act. It would look like routine paperwork to HR, but legally it was a written acknowledgement that Solara received original, signed documentation belonging to me. That signature would later stand as their confession. Every time Ethan looked at me in meetings after that day, I could see the smug satisfaction in his eyes, the certainty that he'd already buried me. He had no idea that the burial ground was his own. By the time I was ready to walk away, my evidence was airtight, my timing perfect, and my silence deadly. I wasn't planning to fight him anymore. I was planning to end his ownership of everything he thought he controlled. That Friday morning felt strangely peaceful, the kind of quiet that settles right before a storm breaks. I came in early, hours before anyone else, and walked the long glass corridor that had once made me proud to belong there. Now it felt like a museum of arrogance, clean, expensive, and soulless. I placed a single envelope on my desk, my resignation letter printed on crisp paper. Inside was a small black flash drive, no larger than a house key, containing the complete and cryptographically signed documentation of the Eclipse Core, the real version, untouched and authenticated. I had made 2 copies, one locked away in my apartment safe and one to hand over officially. I wanted them to believe they had it all, because the best trap is the one your enemy thinks they built themselves. At exactly 10, I walked into HR. Diane, the manager, greeted me with a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her office was decorated with pastel posters about teamwork and positivity, which somehow made the moment colder. "Julia, this is a surprise," she said, sliding a box of tissues toward me. "Ethan asked me to make sure you knew he values your work. He's even open to revisiting your equity terms." I nodded politely, feeling an odd calm settle into my voice. "Diane, I don't need a stake in something built on dishonesty." She blinked, confused, then glanced down at the letter I slid across her desk. She skimmed it quickly, stopping. At the final line I'd written, the one referencing all original invention documentation. She didn't understand the weight of those words, not yet. She signed the receipt line automatically, eager to finish the awkward conversation. That signature was everything I needed, a time-stamped acknowledgement that Solara had formally accepted my resignation and the attached materials. Legally, it tied them to possession of the very evidence that would expose their fraud. I stood, thanked her, and left before she could say another word. As I walked down the hallway for the last time, I passed the framed company motto, "We own the future." The irony almost made me laugh. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone. For 11 years, I had maintained Solara's back-end architecture. I knew the structure better than anyone alive, and I also knew they'd forgotten to deactivate my administrator credentials. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I was already logged in remotely. Outside, standing in the morning sunlight, I initiated a secure multipass wipe of the internal directory where all Eclipse Core files were stored. It wasn't a deletion, it was obliteration, rewriting every byte into random data until nothing remained but digital noise. The logs would stay intact, though, showing every access and modification made by Ethan and Naomi. They'd try to spin it, but the audit trail would betray them. I looked up at the towering Solara building, its mirrored surface catching the sky, and whispered quietly, "You told me to walk away, Ethan. You never said I couldn't take the truth with me." Then I turned and kept walking, not once looking back. The first week after I left was silent, almost eerily so. I imagined the panic brewing inside Solara's tower, their frantic searches for missing files, the emergency meetings, the growing suspicion that their control was slipping. By the 12th day, the first move came. A courier delivered a thick envelope from a downtown law firm. Inside was a letter accusing me of intellectual property theft and malicious interference. It was dressed in expensive language, but the tone reeked of desperation. I scanned it once, then filed it in a folder titled Evidence. They never mentioned my name on the patent. That omission told me everything. They were bluffing. Still, I knew this was just the opening volley. The real fight would be fought on my ground, not theirs. I spent the next few days mapping out my strategy, and the first step was finding an ally powerful enough to make Ethan feel cornered. I knew Solara's biggest rival, Orion Energy Systems. They'd spent years trying to outpace Solara in renewable tech, but had fallen behind, until now. I dug into their public filings, their product lines, their weaknesses. What they lacked was exactly what I had. I found the name of Orion's Chief Technology Officer, Marcus Vale, a man known for playing long games and rewarding loyalty. Through a professional network database, I located his direct email. My message was simple. Confidential inquiry regarding proprietary clean energy platform. Julia Cross, principal inventor of the Eclipse Core. It took less than 2 hours for his assistant to respond. Mr. Vale is available tomorrow at 3 p.m. in Austin. The speed told me everything. They knew the name, and they knew the opportunity. The next afternoon, I walked into Orion's headquarters, a glass spire that gleamed with quiet confidence. Marcus met me in a minimalist conference room overlooking the city. No lawyers, no entourage, just him and a quiet woman with a tablet. "You have something Solara no longer controls," he said without preamble. I opened my laptop and projected the 3D model of the Eclipse Core. It's a self-sustaining quantum battery that recycles ambient electromagnetic fields. No fuel, no waste, infinite uptime. He leaned forward slightly, but his expression didn't change. "Impressive," he said, "but I need proof of freedom from encumbrance." I nodded, opening a new file, the original patent submission, time-stamped and signed under my name 3 years earlier. Then I brought up Solara's fraudulent twin filing, complete with internal metadata showing Naomi Greer's credentials and Ethan's digital signature. "They tried to replace my authorship after the fact," I said. "There's no signed transfer agreement. That alone nullifies their ownership claim." His legal advisor looked up from her tablet. "So they have no valid assignment chain, and you can prove intentional fraud." "Exactly." The silence stretched. Marcus finally smiled, a small, knowing expression that reminded me of someone about to close a deal they'd been waiting years for. "If we were to acquire the technology, Solara would sue us immediately," he said. "They'd lose, but they'd make noise." "Noise is fine," I replied, "as long as it's public." That was when his tone shifted from curiosity to interest. "You're not selling, are you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not selling. Licensing, exclusively, worldwide, in perpetuity. You get full commercialization rights, I retain ownership." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." "It's strategic," I said, "and there's one clause I need added." I slid a printed page across the table, a simple addition to the agreement I drafted myself. "If Solara ever licenses or repurchases the Eclipse Core from Orion, 35% of all fees paid will go directly to me." Marcus read the line twice, then laughed softly. "You want them to pay you every time they use what they tried to steal." "No," I said. "I want them to remember me every time they profit from their failure." He nodded once. "You'll get your clause." 90 minutes later, we signed. The deal was sealed with a handshake, not ceremony. When I left the building, the sky was turning gold and the city lights were just beginning to blink awake. I walked to the parking lot, opened my laptop one more time, and refreshed the USPTO portal. The screen updated with new text. "Exclusive commercialization license granted to Orion Energy Systems by inventor Julia Cross." The trap was officially set. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Rourke still believed he was untouchable. He had no idea the weapon that would end his empire was already signed, sealed, and waiting for morning headlines. The first blow landed on a Monday morning when the Wall Street Journal broke the story. "Orion Energy secures exclusive rights to revolutionary quantum battery developed by former Solara engineer." My name was there in black print, Julia Cross, inventor. Within hours, Solara's stock started to slip, just a few percentage points at first, then more as the markets woke up. Ethan must have gone ballistic. By noon, I received the inevitable, an emergency summons from Solara's lawyers. They had filed a petition with the Federal Patent Integrity Board, accusing me of theft and breach of contract. The irony was almost poetic. They were accusing me of stealing what they had already stolen. I arrived at the hearing 2 weeks later, calm, rested, and accompanied by Tessa Nolan, a legend in patent litigation. She didn't waste words. Her reputation did the talking. The conference room was sterile and wood-paneled, its air thick with tension. Across from us sat Ethan, Naomi, and a row of expensive attorneys, all pale under the fluorescent lights. Ethan looked different, tired, hollow, like someone who had gone too many nights without sleep. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The lead examiner called the session to order. Solara's counsel went first, weaving a story of betrayal, of a rogue employee who had absconded with corporate property. I let them talk. Lies always sound confident at the beginning. When they finished, Tessa stood, every movement deliberate. The petitioner's claim rests entirely on ownership, she said, so let's address that. She nodded to me. I connected my laptop to the display, projecting the original patent filing, time-stamped, digitally signed and authenticated under my personal registry 3 years earlier. This, I said, is the initial submission for the Eclipse Core, filed by me as an independent inventor prior to any assignment to Solara Dynamics. I switched to the next slide, showing the fraudulent version. This is Solara's subsequent draft, created 4 minutes later, substituting my authorship for theirs. The metadata shows who made the edit. The screen filled with a line of text. User ID, E. Rourke. The silence that followed was surgical. Ethan shifted in his seat, face pale. "That's impossible," he blurted. "She tampered with company records." Tessa didn't even look up. "Mr. Rourke, you're under oath," she said, and as the examiner can see, the server access logs were preserved. Every login, every change. Would you like to explain why your credentials were used to alter the inventor of record at 1:14 a.m.? The examiner's brow furrowed. "Do you have the signed assignment of invention, Mr. Rourke?" Ethan looked at Naomi, who flipped through her folders, her hands trembling slightly. "The execution was pending," she said weakly. "So there is no signed transfer?" Tessa pressed. "No," Naomi admitted. The examiner leaned back, eyes cool and expression unreadable. "Then the ownership remains with Ms. Cross. This panel finds the petition without merit. Solara Dynamics' claim is denied." The gavel came down, a dull sound that carried the weight of finality. Ethan's face collapsed, the arrogance stripped away, replaced by disbelief. It wasn't anger anymore. It was recognition. He had lost everything. Tessa gathered our papers with a calm efficiency, but I just stood there for a moment, absorbing it. 11 years of loyalty erased with one ruling, and yet it wasn't revenge that filled me. It was clarity. When I walked out of that room, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward. I said only one thing: never mistake silence for weakness. Then I kept walking. That night, Orion's press release hit the wires, confirming the exclusive $650 million valuation of the Eclipse Core. The number was deliberate. Ethan's own valuation had become the price of his downfall. Solara's shares plummeted 22% by the next morning, and by the end of the week, Ethan Rourke had been forced to resign. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The truth had done it for me. In the months that followed, the world moved on, but Solara didn't. Without the Eclipse Core, their entire roadmap disintegrated. Investors fled, contracts collapsed, and the once untouchable company sold for less than 15% of its former value. Ethan disappeared from the industry entirely. Some said he retreated to a remote house in Colorado. Others claimed he was consulting quietly under another name. I didn't care enough to find out. What mattered was that the technology was free from greed, free from theft, finally in the hands of people who wanted to use it, not control it. I started small again in a modest office with 2 desks and a secondhand espresso machine. I named my firm CrossTech Integrity Group. No investors, no shareholders, just me and a handful of engineers who'd been burned the same way I had. We specialized in protecting inventors, documenting, filing, and defending their ideas before someone could strip their names away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. One morning, about a year after the hearing, a wooden box arrived on my desk with no return address. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was the first commercial Eclipse Core, encased in transparent carbon glowing faintly with its own light. A note was, tucked underneath, "This is yours, it always was. MV." I ran my hand over the casing and felt something like peace for the first time in years. All the noise, the battles, the headlines, it had all been worth it for this moment of quiet clarity. Later that night, as I stood by my apartment window, the city lights below shimmered like circuitry. I thought of that day in the boardroom, Ethan's voice daring me to walk out. He thought those words would break me. Instead, they became the start of my freedom. I whispered them once more just to hear them lose their power. If you think you're that valuable, walk out. Then I smiled, because I did, and I took the light with me. Looking back, I realized revenge was never the point. It was about reclaiming what was mine. When Ethan dared me to walk out, he thought I'd vanish quietly, like so many others who had been silenced by power. But walking away didn't mean giving up. It meant choosing self-respect over validation. In this country, where hard work is often treated as loyalty instead of value, we're taught to keep our heads down, to stay grateful even when we're being erased. But there's a difference between humility and submission. I learned that documentation is power, that knowledge and truth, when handled with discipline, can outlast arrogance. I didn't destroy Ethan's world to feel victorious. I did it because sometimes justice means letting consequences unfold naturally. And when they finally did, I felt no triumph, only release. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. You don't have to shout to prove your worth. You just have to know what's yours and refuse to let anyone rewrite your story. The world is full of Ethans, people who build empires on the backs of others' work, but it's also full of opportunities to walk away stronger, not smaller. The key is preparation, awareness, and the courage to act when the time comes. How to get started today. Keep records of your work, emails, notes, designs, because your proof is your protection. Set boundaries early. Don't confuse loyalty with servitude. Learn enough about your field's rules, contracts, ownership, rights, to defend yourself intelligently. When someone underestimates you, let their arrogance do the work for you. If this story reminded you of someone who tried to take credit for your effort, tell me in the comments. Share your story. And if you believe in quiet justice, subscribe, because sometimes the calmest voices carry the loudest truth.